right, so the recession is officially over, or so the experts say, but it certainly does not feel like it to most Americans. Why is that? Lakshman Achuthan is the co-founder of the Economic Cycle Research Institute, and he joins us with his take. Let's start with that. I mean, NBER are the only ones that can tell us we're in a recession or out of one, saying this great recession ended in June 2009. We have higher unemployment now than we did then. The housing crisis still exists. It doesn't feel to most people that it's over.
Right, and the reason this is important, just to be clear, is that they're objective. I mean, all of us have opinions, and including them, but they're following a very objective methodology, and the weight of the data dictate that the recession actually ended in June of 2009. Now, what is that data? It's all these key measures of the economy right outside our window. So we have production data like GDP or industrial production. You have sales, how much stuff is being sold at stores, income, how much is everybody making from work, and then jobs, work itself, what's going on with jobs, in particular in the private sector. And when you look at all of those different measures of the economy, coincident measures of the economy, you see that they began to improve in the summer of 2009. And to be clear, what we're talking about here is the economy moving or making it into the recovery room.
Right. So June 2009, what they're saying was the bottom.
Was the bottom. And so you finally made it to the recovery room. But anyone who's been in the recovery room knows it hurts. It still really hurts. It's not over yet. There's a lot of healing that has to be done. And when you look at those major measures, production, income, sales, and employment, GDP has recovered 70% of what it lost, regardless of why. Sales and income have recovered about half of what they lost, regardless of the reason why. It's just a fact that has happened. But the reason, the disconnect, I think, between anyone listening and saying, hey, it doesn't feel like a recovery,
right,
what is this guy talking about, is that 9%, only 9% of the jobs lost in the private sector have been recovered. And so there's a big disparity where 70% of GDP has recovered. However, only 9% of jobs has recovered, and that's why we have a long way to go here, and it doesn't feel good.
And jobs is key to this. I mean, most economists that we surveyed at CNN Money do not think we're going to fall into a so-called double-dip recession, but they all tend to agree that jobs is the outlier here. When it comes to jobs, we call them a lagging indicator, but NBER saying the recession ended more than a year ago. So when is that return?
Yeah, they're actually roughly coincident. In recent recoveries, they've lagged a bit, and so we've had this term ever since the early 90s of the jobless recovery, and we saw it again.
Is that what we're seeing?
And we're seeing that today. It's for a different reason than in the early 90s. We also saw it in the early 2000s. And here we're seeing, again, a so-called jobless recovery. One main reason is because you lost so many jobs. You lost over 8 million jobs, and so it takes a long time to earn that back. So even though we've made, say, 750,000 jobs this year, it doesn't feel like much. Even though it's a decent number, it doesn't feel like anything because you're comparing that to losing over 8 million.
What we're hearing from NBER is that if indeed another recession started between now and back in June 2009 when the Great Recession ended, they would not call that a continuation of that recession. They would call it a new recession.
So if we have another recession, it'll be a separate recession. People will call it double dip. It's a pseudo-technical term. It can mean whatever you want it to mean. So don't take it as meaning anything very precise. But in terms of if there's a new recession, I think the jury is still out. People don't know this, but
what are you seeing through leading indicators?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. The jury is still out. Whenever you have a slowdown, and we at the beginning of this year, we forecast a slowdown by mid-year. We're in that now. The economy started slowing in the second quarter of 2010. Every time you go into a slowdown, there's a 50-50 chance that it'll turn out to be a recession. That's just the lay of the land over more than half a century. When you look at the leading indicators, they have not yet forecast a new recession. They have held off, even though people are kind of feeling like it would be.
What about that feeling, consumer sentiment? It's something that we measure, that economists measure, and that the market takes into consideration. How much does consumer sentiment matter? If you look at GDP, 2/3 of that, consumer spending. Consumers drive the American economy.
Yeah,
If they're
no, it
not
matters.
feeling like spending, not spending, how much does that actually drive us downwards?
Well, no. Look, psychology here matters a lot, and it's a key driver of the business cycle, not only the consumer, but also the businesses. When you look at the consumer now, they are pessimistic. They were pessimistic in the early 90s, and we had a 10-year expansion. They were pessimistic in the early 2000s, and we had about a 7-year expansion.
Right.
They're pessimistic now. It doesn't in and of itself mean that this is a short expansion, okay? Perceptions lag reality. That's always what happens, okay? And it'll be no different this time. What's really critical is that now that we are in a recovery, and we have been for a little while, that the business cycle dynamics that are very vicious during a recession, they become virtuous during a recovery, where the fact that consumers, even while they're pessimistic, they're actually buying things. And because they're buying things, industrial production is going up. GDP is still expanding.
Inventories are going up.
When inventories and production go up, managers have to actually hire people to meet that continued demand.
So despite the psychology, they have to move this economy forward.
Yeah, look, nothing happens in a straight line. There's a lot of anxiousness here. I can't rule out a new recession on the horizon. However, I think there's a good chance we dodge it here, too.
Locke, thanks. Great insight.
Thank you.